right, everybody. Welcome to How to Be a Texan. How you doing, Kevin?
Great.
Yeah?
How are you?
Oh, man, I'm fantastic. We're going to talk about an interesting one today. So,
What, summertime? I've been hanging out by the pool today
Well,
with the kids.
It is hot outside.
Yeah.
So, but no, we're going to talk about something that happens as a result of African heat.
No, that's odd.
That's what we're going to talk about.
Oh, I think I know where you're going.
Well, I hope so. Hurricanes are a result, not cyclones, but hurricanes are a result of the winds sweeping across African deserts, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, whipping up into a frenzy, into a hurricane, and then bashing into our coast.
Yep. It is weird to watch how they form over there and just kind of shoot straight towards the Gulf of Mexico or the East Coast.
That's right. That's right.
There's a very clear path
for
where they come from.
That's right. And we know that now, but we didn't know that back in 1900. And you know why I say that? Because today I want to talk about a historic event, and that was the 1900 Galveston Hurricane.
That was a doozy.
It was a doozy.
That was a big one.
So that was known as the worst natural killer in U.S. history.
Some might say a Texas-size hurricane.
Texas-sized hurricane that was deadly. So let's get into that in just a little bit. But first of all, a little bit of backstory on what a hurricane is. So all that is a hurricane is a storm with a violent wind, in particular a tropical cyclone in the Caribbean.
In case that someone has had their head under a rock for
and
the
didn't
past
know
decade and doesn't know what a hurricane
There may be babies listening. There may be like little 3-year-olds, and so we're teaching them.
That was that Katrina thing, huh? I wonder what that was.
And what are they called if a hurricane hits the Philippines? What are they called?
I don't know.
It's something different. It's not a hurricane.
Yeah, because it doesn't originate off of Africa, does it?
It's not a cyclone. It's a...
Monsoon?
No, that's close, though. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, I will look that up here, and I'll have an answer shortly.
It's something totally different than a hurricane. It's a funky word, but it's a good one. Typhoon. Thank you, Kendra. Typhoon. See, a hurricane is on this side of the world. A typhoon's on that one.
Where do typhoons originate?
Jersey?
New Jersey?
I don't know. I mean, it kind of makes sense.
Most bad things come out of New Jersey.
Well, think about it. If we
shoot them straight towards the Philippines?
Yeah, from Jersey, the winds whip across the country over to the Philippines, and they gain a head of steam and then crash into the Philippines.
We're way off topic.
I'm just saying, it could happen.
Specifically from New Jersey.
Well, if you follow the example, the winds across the Sahara generate Texas-sized hurricanes. Jersey starts it, and it has to go all the way past whatever, Fuji, and
nothing good comes out of Jersey.
I don't know. So anyway, going back to this. So I'm not even sure. I'm going to tell you a little bit of history on hurricanes, but on the severity scale, there is something called the Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Wind Scale, and they grade those 1 to 5. And so just real quickly, I don't know what the 1900 hurricane was, but we'll get to it. It had to be something really bad. But this was only developed back by a couple of really smart dudes that work for the National Hurricane Center and a civil engineer. Saffir was the engineer. Simpson was the U.S. National Hurricane Center guy. And they came up with this 1 through 5 rating system. And so these are for just hurricanes. I don't know about typhoons.
The 1900 hurricane was a Category 4.
Category 4. Mm-hmm. So that's a doozy.
That's the biggest one.
So let's go. No. It can be a 5.
Oh, you're right. There's a 5.
Yeah, there's a 5. So let's go worst to best. So a 5 is going to be catastrophic damage, 157 miles per hour wind or higher, and it's super bad. Super bad. I don't even know how to say that other than super bad. So 157 miles an hour. Category 4 is catastrophic, 130 miles to 156 miles per hour. Well-built frame homes can sustain severe damage with loss of most of the roof, etc. I think in 5s, it's just like everything's gone via water and wind. And then 3s are 111 mile an hour twos are 96 to 110 mile an hour, and then ones are 74 to 95, which is nothing to scoff at. Very dangerous. I mean, can you imagine a 95 mile an hour wind coming at you with oodles of rain in it?
Oh, I've ridden my bike in 95 mile per hour wind before.
I remember when you rode your bike out in an ice storm. That was the dumbest thing I ever said. You call me and you're like, "Hey man, you want to go ride a bike?" I'm like, "Dude, it's ice outside."
It was beautiful that day. The snow
Our little
on the side of
tires
the road.
are like, what, 10 millimeters wide? I even told you that. I'm like, man, you're gonna wipe out.
It was great. You missed it. There was no wipeout.
That was a bad decision.
No, I have ridden into 30 mile per hour winds, and that is really, really hard. I could not fathom 95 mile per hour wind.
And that's only a category 1.
And that's only category 1.
So if you're category 5, that's 157 miles per hour or worse with crazy rain in there. So it just says most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks or months after one of the category 5s comes through. And I can't remember. I think Rita was a 4. And Katrina was I think it was a 5 for a bit. And then it came down to a 3 and then popped back up to a 4.
I can find that real quick.
Yeah. So Katrina was a bad boy. The bad thing is there was all this crazy damage that happened as a result of Katrina with Lake Pontchartrain and the dams coming down and basically flooding the city.
It was a Cat 5.
It was Cat 5.
Katrina was Cat 5,
Yeah.
and then Rita.
Okay, so going back to her. So first of all, we just had Harvey come through last year in Houston.
Rita was a Cat 5.
Yeah, so we had a double. So we had Rita and Katrina come through basically New Orleans at Cat 5s, 3 weeks away? I mean, it was ridiculous. I mean, what kind of bad luck is that?
And then Harvey was a Cat 4.
Cat 4, but the interesting thing about Harvey was it
stayed over Houston for a long
56 inches of rain. I was just talking to a buddy about this because I work with a ton of people down in Houston. And so they were talking about we'd only heard about the 500-year floodplain. Well, anyway, they come up with this 800-year floodplain. And then I just heard a new term last week. A guy said that it crested over the 2,000-year floodplain. Who has a 2,000-year floodplain?
What does that even mean?
I don't know. But I just heard that term last week.
It's like the floodplain when Jesus was here?
Exactly. I guess he said it. I guess Jesus told us what the flood level would be.
I don't even understand.
I don't either. But that's what I just heard last week, that Harvey caused the 2,000-year floodplain to crest over that.
Interesting.
With 56 inches of rain in 3 days. So anyway, going back to the 1900 Great Galveston Hurricane, there's some interesting stuff around that. There's a book, and the reason why we're talking about this, Kevin, is not only is it Texas history and it's something really, really bad that happened in the U.S., it happened in a time where there wasn't the technology and there wasn't any warning systems, but there was the U.S. meteorology system. And they were tracking, and the phone was around, and they were able to cable each other back and forth about, I don't know if the phone, wait a minute, was the phone here? The phone wasn't here in 1900. They had they were able to Morse code each other back and forth. What was that? Telegrams. Yeah, we could telegram each other. And they were tracking it. And so there was a guy named Isaac Klein, who was a meteorologist, the lead meteorologist sitting on the island of Galveston. And this book that I literally started last night, it's called Isaac's Storm, A Man, a Time, and the Deadliest Hurricane in History. And so far, it's really, really good. So I'd encourage you all to read it. And it talks about, and it's unfortunate because Isaac Klein is not portrayed terribly well in this. He's kind of portrayed as a little bit pompous and full of himself when actually others had been giving him a heads up. It's like, dude, there's some weird things happening with the weather. There's this massive heat wave. There's this tropical storm that just went over Cuba. We've got ships out in the Gulf of Mexico that are telling us this thing is kind of growing. He's seeing the tide go out and kind of ripple effects on some weird wave dynamics. And his brother, who he thought was kind of an idiot, was telling him this, that, hey, dude, this is not right. Something's going on. There was were all these other kind of manifestations of really, really bad weather predictions around crazy heat up in the U.S. Northeast, massive cricket infestations. I mean, it was kind of like, power of God type stuff that summer going into this September. And so what happened is this.
Well, it says he had written an article in 1891. He was a good meteorologist. He wrote an article in 1891 in the Galveston Daily News. And this was 1891, 9 years before the thing happened.
Yeah.
But he wrote this article saying that, in his meteorological opinion, that the idea of a hurricane ever doing any serious harm to Galveston was, quote, a crazy idea.
Right. Because I think the worst that they had seen in our history, and again, 1900, just think about it. That's Texas really just kind of forming up.
Well, and, they had been calling for the creation of a seawall to protect the city, and this kind of shut that down.
Okay. Because I think what he had said was there was a tropical storm that had hit 20 years or whatever before, and it had caused some damage, but it wasn't that big a deal, and so.
But something had to be going on if the residents were already wanting a seawall to be built to protect them, and his article basically shut it down.
Right.
And so I think part of the issue is if he had have not prevented that, the seawall might have made the 1900 hurricane a little less devastating.
Right. And so the interesting thing, again, and I'm just getting into it, but it was by the chart of the path of this hurricane, it really came to a head in the way they looked at it. Is it really formed up and got to that, and you said it was Category 4 by the time it hit, and it hit directly into basically the beaches of Galveston. And the interesting thing was their
Klein's wife died in that storm.
Oh.
And she was pregnant with their child.
Yeah.
Klein nearly drowned, but he managed to survive, and he saved his youngest daughter, who was 6 years old. Well, and so not only did he have an effect because of the seawall issue, then his family was very heavily affected by it. It's a pretty sad story.
Very, very sad. So the death toll, and they say this is the worst U.S. death toll of any storm, and the guesses are anywhere from 6,000 to 12,000.
Now, he did play a good role in his autobiography, which I don't know if that's what you're reading or if you're reading something different.
Something different.
He claims that he took it upon himself to travel along the beach and other areas warning people personally of the storm and the approach to get out of there. And he actually broke protocol by making a unilateral decision to issue a hurricane warning without going through the Bureau's central office in Washington, D.C. So, he felt in the end that he was able to save thousands of lives because of his decision not to wait for approval and to go and help. But so, I think there's kind of a mixed bag on, maybe if he hadn't have written that article, the seawall might have helped, but then kind of in the moment, he really kind of...
He may have rallied.
He rallied a little bit to try to help save some things there. So
and I'm certainly not trying to curse Isaac Klein or the memory of him. I'm just saying that it was, the Galveston at the time was really coming to life. There were 38,000 people there. It was being seen as the New York of the Gulf of Mexico. It was rivaling New Orleans as far as a seaport.
Oh, wow.
It was, there were millionaires and millionaires all along Broadway, which, and there was a lot of, just show of riches and wealth. And so it was a spectacular time for Galveston, which was coming up, and it was trying to really beat out Houston as the premier port city for Texas. And the problem, though, is, Houston being inland, it had some elevation. And so it can survive this. But the highest point at that time on Galveston Island was 8.7 feet above sea level. And with this storm surge, it went well beyond that and stayed well beyond that for some time. And so, and again, going back to today, so Kevin, what you and I would do if we lived down in Houston or we lived along the coast at Corpus or Padre or wherever, we would know that now. We would see it coming in.
Mm-hmm.
We would prepare. There would be all these warnings that came in and said, get out. And then you have all these hurricane evacuation routes where basically like they'll turn 45, Interstate 45, they'll turn both sets of lanes going north.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll shut down the southbound and we'll just all go north. And you'll have 8, 16, 24 lanes that are going across up to the north to get out of there. So today, it's pretty amazing how we warn people and we get out. Or you don't, and you take your chances. And there's a lot of people, obviously, that do that. But back then in 1900, there wasn't much of that. They tried to put as best they could some data together, but there, as what I'm reading right now in this really good book, is that it was pretty limited. I mean, it's like, that's odd. And then all of a sudden, 3 hours later, a Cat 4 hurricane rolls right over your face.
Yeah. And there was a lot more manual kind of, obviously manual work being done, right?
Yeah.
So his client's brother, Joseph, was also a meteorologist, and he was a stellar meteorologist, and he had helped to kind of predict, looking at some things that were happening. And I don't even know how they looked at things back then or how they even had the data. But they had ways to... They had ways to look at it, but they didn't necessarily have, like the satellite technology or stuff that, obviously. But they had other ways of predicting, but they didn't have the communication technologies either, right?
Oh, no.
So you could kind of figure it out, but then how do you, number one, make sure you're right?
Right.
And then number two, how do you get the word out when you have no communication infrastructure other than maybe, telegrams like you were saying? But it sounds like this guy was literally going in a boat up and down the island saying, something's coming, get out of here. So just the advantages that we have today on technology to be able to track that, as soon as it forms in Africa all the way. And, we'll see, okay, it could go into the Gulf, could go hit the East Coast. And when it goes into the Gulf, it could go to New Orleans. We track it all along the way now. And with instant communication, it's just really mind-boggling to think, what could have been going on in 1900. It's just hard to even wrap your mind around it.
No, that's right. Well, this storm, and I agree. So the signs that could have helped to avoid this, I don't know if they existed with the technology they had back in the time. But there was, there was communication around that this tropical storm had just gone over Cuba. Ships out in the Gulf were noticing it and reporting back on it. But I'm not sure that was getting back or being acted on at the time. The storm itself ended up tracking from, obviously generating out of Africa, going over Cuba to Galveston, and then it kind of circled back up through the Northeast, went all the way across the U.S., and ended and petered out at Iceland, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
So it had a huge track on it.
That's intense.
So not only did it kill all those people over in Galveston, but it had a deadly effect with the rainstorms all the way across the U.S. as it tracked back.
Some of the stats on Galveston, they estimate anywhere from 6,000 to 12,000 people were killed.
Yeah.
3,600 buildings were destroyed.
Yeah. So
and obviously they rebuilt it, but it never regained its status.
No.
And that is when Houston kind of took over. But they did build the seawall as a result of that.
Right. The one of the really sweet stories that really has become Texas legend, and I've been in healthcare my whole career, and I've done work for a lot of the Roman Catholic organizations. One of them that was a client of mine was the Sisters of Charity, and the Sisters of Charity, they had an orphanage down in Galveston at the time, and to that point they had 10 nuns and then 90 orphans, and it was called St. Mary's Orphans Asylum. It sounds pretty bad.
That sounds weird.
Yeah,
I'm sure asylum had a different meaning back then, though.
It sounds
like it was just an orphanage.
Yeah, so it was an orphanage on the island, and so what happened? They had a 2-story building. And when they saw the storm coming and the floodwaters approaching and rising, they ended up getting up on the second floor of that building. They took as many as they could. So they operated this orphanage, and then they operated a hospital, and it was called St. Mary's Infirmary, and that's where I have the tie. Literally, I have a tie to that one. And I'll tell you about that in just a minute. So there were 2 buildings, and so they tried to get as many as they could to the hospital because it was a stronger base. It had a second floor, and they could get up to that. But at the orphanage itself, the floodwaters came. They got on the second floor. The surge came after that, ended up moving the orphanage off its foundation, broke out the bottom, and they all flooded. The only ones that survived, there were 3 young men that had crawled up on the roof, but each of the nuns had tied themselves to 6 or 8 young kids, and so they were basically all drowned. They found a couple of the sisters still clutching, a couple of kids each, and that had gone all the way over to the mainland, and they were still tied up together to the children, and they were clutching them even in death.
Wow.
Which was
that's an incredible story.
Very, very sad, but very
moving.
Very much so. So the story that I have, which is not moving at all, it's quite depressing, is back in, 95, whenever I started my career. One of my first jobs was, I had a partner here, and he said, "Hey, Kyle, I need you to go down to Galveston." And UTMB, which is the giant teaching hospital down there, they were buying this hospital, St. Mary's. And so my job was just to do, my partner said at Arthur Anderson, he just said, "Kyle, go down there and do whatever the CFO tells you." And so I'm like, "Yes, sir." And so I went down. Here I am, this green guy. I go down there. They buy the facility and close it down. They fire everybody and close it down. And they did it as a defensive move, which, because back in the day, HCA was coming on, and it was a real threat. And St. Mary's was, it was not doing well at all. And anyway, so my job was to go and.
So this is what's the connection? This used to be that orphanage?
This was that hospital, and I went and I closed it.
But it was the orphanage that the nuns were in, or
it was the orphanage where a lot of them. It's the hospital where a lot of them.
Oh, a lot of people
found refuge.
Oh, I got you.
Yeah.
I got you.
And it was probably 3 or 4 building generations later where they probably knocked that down. And So it's not like I was, But anyway, my job was to unfortunately close it.
Way to go, man.
Yeah, so I felt quite bad about that. So, matter of fact, I got to be buddies with the security guard. They're at it, and on the last day, I'm like, "Well, give me the keys, and your job is no longer. I'm sorry." So I'm such a jerk. But anyway.
That's rough.
Yeah.
Not as rough as a Cat 4 hurricane, but pretty close.
No, not at all. But Galveston itself, even now, today, it has certainly rebuilt. It's not, Houston is by far more, a dominant kind of city, but Houston is phenomenal.
Galveston has a lot of cruise ship business now.
It does.
A lot of cruises go in and out of there.
Yeah.
Tons of them.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I thought the book that I'm reading, and then this story alone, I just didn't know much about this, but really, really sad story about this major hurricane that hit.
Deadliest natural disaster in American history.
Yeah, point blank. They just didn't even know it was coming, and just bam.
Yeah.
And just hammered them. And if it's 8.7 feet up and it's a 20-foot surge, the whole island's underwater.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
And so it said out of 38,000 people, it displaced about 30,000 of them.
Wow.
So they basically had to rebuild the island.
Wow.
Yeah. So, anyway, good stuff, man. I like to try to keep it light, but this one's kind of hard,
I thought we were talking about, hanging out by the pool in summertime.
Well, I like that.
Hanging out on the beach.
No, this one, I chose a dark path here. Sorry.
No, it's not dark. It's part of Texas history, part of American history, actually, as the deadliest event, natural disaster in American history. So.
Right.
It's good to kind of look back on that and then be thankful for the technologies that we have today that would prevent such devastation from happening.
No, that's right. That's right. So now I encourage us, just as hurricane season starts for us now. I just say stay vigilant. Let's keep watching and try to stay as safe as we can.
Yeah. Well, up here in Dallas, it's not. We just kind of keep an eye on our friends down in Houston when this happens, and if they need a place to, come, open up. But luckily, we don't get, too much from these other than some rain, things of that nature.
No, that's true. true. All right, well, that's it for this week.
All right.
So thanks for listening.
Look us up on iTunes, Google Play, Spreaker. Leave us a review. Adios.
Adios.